Hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, college football fans across the nation and around the world. This is the Tim May Show with Matt Wilhelm, coming to you live and direct from my studios via a Zoom hookup with one of my favorite players of all time, Matt Wilhelm, the guy who called me out on a prediction I never even made. Right? He thought my brother Mark May. You
I
got me
did,
mixed up
yes.
with
I
my
tell that
brother by
story all
another mother, Mark
I
May.
tell that story all the time. And
I
it's
know.
like there's not many times in life, especially outside of your marriage where you have egg on your face and you're
Yeah.
always wrong.
Oh
That was
no, dude.
definitely one of them.
I know, dude. You guys are focused. You just heard this May guy made a prediction. I know that. I
Yeah.
just that's the one thing I got on you, and that's about it. But I just I love these conversations we have. Number one, number two. Back through the years, we had a little thing going here, and I really enjoy it. But
Yeah, it's
I just
great.
wanted to get your take. Ohio State didn't play over the weekend. Had one of its two off weeks, although supposedly they practiced their rear ends off at the Woody Hayes Athletic Center. But, just as you got to watch a little bit of football and pay attention to maybe some stuff that was going on over the weekend, Matt, obviously I don't expect you to sit there and watch football like I do from noon till what 2 in the morning or whatever it was. But by the way, I don't think that South Carolina LSU game is over yet. That was
No,
ridiculous.
no,
But
no.
I wanted to
Well,
ask you, man, when you watch a game and you see a team lose its starting quarterback this early in the year, you saw Texas, Quinn Ewers go out and Arch Manning come in and replace him with some aplomb. You saw Wisconsin lose its transfer
Wisconsin
starting
not be
quarter.
able to. Yeah,
Yeah, Tyler
sure.
Van Dyke.
Yeah,
And
I
then
think it's such a point. It's also in some cases you look at the two games that were being played, and Wisconsin, Alabama. That's a game that was probably scheduled at minimum 5 years ago as some type of home and home, pre-COVID home and home that they're finally going to be able to execute on.
yeah,
And this meant a lot to the Wisconsin program. Because they're kind of floating in the Big Ten, and now that they're hoping that this new Big Ten and they're stacking some rock solid recruiting classes on top of each other, that they would essentially be able to compete in the Big Ten.
yeah,
And it's the reason why you go and schedule the standard of college football with what Nick Saban created at Alabama over the last 10 to 15 years, and you have them come to Camp Randall, and it's you're up, the fans are up. I'm sure they weren't as saucy as they wanted to be because it was big noon kickoff, so it's a noon game. But they might have started at 3 a.m. for all we know. But that
yeah.
said, the game was still very close early, and uh, we're always going to do this. It's like a boxing match. It's like both teams are throwing jabs. It's like punt, couple first downs, couple first downs, punt. Really nothing. And then and I was actually watching it because my son's game was not till 2, so I was able to watch a little bit of that game. It was very one of the games that I wanted to watch to see Alabama with Kayla DeBoer, but also Luke Fickell in Wisconsin and what they are going to represent this year. And I saw the kid get hurt. It stinks. And I think it's also, and Ohio State is not in a situation, and neither is Texas, and neither is many of probably like the top 10 schools that stack 4-star and 5-star kids almost every recruiting class at the quarterback position. But you just saw that a Wisconsin team who went out and got the guy from Miami to essentially lead you to compete in the new Big Ten where there are no East and West divisions, and press Ohio State, Penn State, the Oregons of the world, Michigans of the Big Ten, and so on. And it's a massive blow. Did they say, is it going to be season ending for Van Dyke?
Yeah, it's not clear, but it looked pretty bad. Yeah,
Right.
but it's
And
going to be a while. Let's put it the other way.
correct. But it just goes to show, and I would imagine that, will there be a blip, meaning like a blip, like a blip of the offense not functioning the way that it's supposed to be at Ohio State, if Will Howard, who's getting the lion's share of the reps, call it, say 60, 20, 20, 60, 40, whatever it may be with the first and second guy.
Yeah,
But those guys have so much time and effort being put into them as the starters to go out and execute a specific plan and developing a rapport with the line and the receivers and running backs to go out and execute and win a game, especially a big game. And you saw what happened, how deflating it was for Wisconsin to lose their guy and how much the offense changed. It became very pedestrian when you didn't have confidence in the next guy to go do it. Now, as I said, we saw Texas with Arch Manning, who's been waiting in the wings with Quinn Ewers, who's come back and earned that opportunity. I think we talked about maybe a couple of weeks ago
yeah,
at the quarterback position, won that battle last year, won it again this year with that highly touted 5-star kid behind him. And but a guy that was ready to play, a guy that has immense amount of talent, a guy that has an immense amount of pressure to go out and then do it when that opportunity arises. And I do feel that the two games that Ohio State has played thus far, I do think, even Devin Brown last year taking all the bowl practice and then going into the bowl game as the starter, although he didn't play the whole game because of an injury. And then we saw, Lincoln come in next and do what he did, which was not a whole lot. But there's something to be said about having that guy, be under the pressure of always being one play away. Or having a roster full of talented guys that are always one play away, whether it's a snap, the rest of a game, multiple weeks in a row, or for the whole season. And I think the great staffs in our country also are prepared for that, and they pivot very well in their play calling. They just don't go from highly explosive Chip Kelly offense to pedestrian turnaround and hand the ball off. You've got immense talented guys that have got reps in this system through spring ball, through summer ball, and in these early opportunities we've had, like we talked about, to be able to get out there and do it in front of 100,000 people.
Yeah. And how important, though, is it, like this week against Marshall, Ohio State hosts Marshall? I brought this up on a video we did at LettermenRow.com earlier this week. You got it. They talked about this in the spring, but you've got to play Devin Brown. Not just if you get a blowout going and then play Devin Brown, and maybe play Julian Sayin.
Yes.
You saw little snippets, of what he can be. You owe it to yourself and the team. I'm talking about as a coaching staff, to play these guys, because this stuff happens, right?
You do. You absolutely do. You have to prepare for that. You have to, and you can't call, I'm not calling it contingency, but contingent upon something happening to your starter, you have to be ready to pivot appropriately with a guy who's able to execute your offense at I'll call it, say, a 75% clip with a 25% drop off of what the starter was. Here's the other thing that I'll say. And, I know you mentioned the 2002 game against Cincinnati, and it wasn't quite relevant then, but that was a road game, that to go on the road against a quality in-state opponent, at Paul Brown Stadium, and took us to the final seconds, essentially. What's unique about this, I'll call it like group of five school like Marshall, that a lot of fans may not take for granted, is when you, and I'm learning this because my son's in this recruiting process, and I'm learning a lot about these group of fives and power fives and how they're constructed. Is Marshall is a school that if you went to their MarshallThunderingHerd.com, whatever their athletic football website is, and you look, I'm sure it's 60% of the roster are kids that were recruited to Marshall out of high school. But the other 30 or 35 kids are kids that came from Power 5 opportunities that now kind of like transferred down to play a lot and compete and go win a conference and go win 6 games and get on the field and bet on themselves at a smaller venue like Marshall in the Sun Belt Conference to go play, which is still quality football. But you're getting, Bama kids, University of North Carolina ACC kids transferring to Marshall to go walk into a starting job. But they were at one time a 3-star or 4-star, going to those bigger schools that just never panned out because they just got buried on a roster. Competition, maybe they got hurt and got buried for whatever reason. So you're going to see an uptick in talent than we've seen the first 2 weeks between Western Michigan and Akron to what we're going to see coming off of a bye against Marshall. And I think it's also why Ryan, that we talked about last week, why Ryan Day preached having energy and hard practices and staying in flow, because you want to come out just like we did against Western Michigan, fast and furious, both on offense and defense, to kind of put the pedal to the metal and not skip a beat.
Yeah. That's why I always remind people about this, like a Marshall too. I mean, like you just said, I mean, they benefited from transfers just like Ohio State has, just not maybe on the same level.
Sure.
But they can put a competent first team out there, both offensively and defensively.
Oh, yeah.
It's just when you get into the depth situation, which is where an Ohio State, an Alabama, a Georgia hold sway. You know what I mean? I mean, because then their next guy off the bench is almost as good as the first guy. You know what I mean?
Correct.
Whereas,
yes,
and that's not necessarily the case at a Marshall. I'm talking about just from a talent standpoint.
Absolutely.
And that's why this is an interesting game. I mean, you and I've talked about this before on here. This is just such a stepping stone, stepping up schedule that Ohio State has, including going to Michigan State in a couple of weeks, and then hosting Iowa before they go to the big showdown game with Oregon. Hey, I want to get into this real quick before we move on. I want to get your take just on the polls right now, because obviously the polls are in flux. Sometimes poll voters have to get slapped a little bit, you know what I mean, to really understand what this season is about, as opposed to last year. Florida State, which opened the preseason poll was what 9th or 10th, and it's lost 3 in a row. Are you kidding me? You know,
so I definitely
wait. Well, I want to get to this, but then you see Georgia go into Kentucky, which got drilled by South Carolina the week before. Georgia goes in and struggles, but finally figures out a way to win at the end of that game. You know, at this point, do you really know how good teams are, Matt? You were in the same.
At this point you really don't, because so much of it has to do with, you know, their off season, you know, their transfers, their recruits, what's returning, how are they all vibing? And I know that's kind of been a thing, you know, probably a topic in Columbus with all the new faces between Caleb Downs and McLaughlin, and the role that Jeremiah Smith would have as a new face, Will Howard at quarterback, the shuffling of the offensive line. How is that all going to get figured out? So it's been a thing. It's high level. You're dealing with aces and kings and queens at a school like Ohio State, where you're shuffling them around, right? But I think the polls, in some cases, the polls are for the fans. And I think in some cases, but you as a player are always very cognizant of the polls as well, with where you're at. But you can't let it affect you, you know, because there's going to be shuffling. Like, let's just say Ohio State runs the table to, you know, week 10, you know, I'll say they run the table, but let's just say they're still undefeated, and you know, Bama beats Georgia or somebody in season, and Bama jumps us, and we go from 3 to 4. And like, at the end of the day, you know, when the recipe for getting what we want is still complete, as long as we win each week, is still completely in front of us. Again, the unfinished business, you know, always, you know, the Saturday after Thanksgiving, you know, is a thing. Whomever we play in the Big Ten championship is going to be a thing, and where, you know, and can potentially attempting to control that first round of the new 12-team college football playoff is really what you're after. And to essentially play your way into a third bye, and have this team then go play a hyper competitive, you know, 8-9, you know, 4-5, or 5-11, you know, game against another very, very good football team, and have to do that to move on while you're sitting at home watching, is really what you're after. So like, the polls are for, you know, the folks like you in media. It's also a thing for social media. It's a thing for the fan base. Because ultimately, if you really cocooned yourself as a team, it's irrelevant as long as you keep winning where you're ranked. And it doesn't even matter anymore now that we're not in the BCS.
It gives us something to talk about until the college football playoff championship ratings start coming out. 1st of November, last of October, 1st November. But I think what the Georgia game at Kentucky showed is that there is no such thing as a totally invincible college football team.
No,
there's not even that in the NFL, really, you know, but it's not like high school where you can all of a sudden have that dream team that is better than everybody else.
Correct.
And that's what you have to watch out for. And that's why I brought up that stepping stone schedule a while ago. Is this is a schedule where Ohio State can find its way from, like you said, the chemistry of a new offensive line, which those, you know, 2 new pieces that have been put into the play with Seth McLaughlin at center, and then a new right guard, and maybe Ohio State gets Donovan Jackson back this week. He hadn't played yet. You know, they're all preseason All-American left guard. You know, we'll see how it changes even again and stuff. But this schedule is set up to bring those things along, right? And increasingly test. Whereas in 2002, you guys were tested right out of the gate.
Yes. Yeah.
And you looked so spectacular. And then, like you brought up, you go to Cincinnati. Maurice Clarett isn't playing that day because of a arthroscopic knee surgery, and you guys almost get gadoolied. You know what I mean?
Right.
You know, gadoolied just by hook or crook. Y'all steal that game, and y'all go undefeated. The first team to go 14-0 in major college.
I would also just say, so like, although the platforms for, winning a national championship is different from the BCS to the college football playoff. It's still survive and move on, the BCS was there's when we know it's well documented, like you can if you lose early, you can win your way back into the BCS because of the rankings that were relied upon, for power that made up the BCS, but now it's it really didn't matter. Like it still doesn't matter. I mean, it's again, prepare each week, go out and play your best, because and you have to prepare yourself for, if you're truly, I call it, say, a top 10 football team right now. And I have it over here on my computer. You have to prepare yourself to play a 14, 15, 16 game season.
Yeah.
So to your point about not having that, Oregon, Ohio State, Texas. I know that there's home and homes with I think Bama in the future. And another home and home. I guess whoever it is escapes me, but it was exciting when it got announced.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Texas next year. Yeah.
Who is it?
They play Texas next year.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. So again, a Texas home and home. It's like it's going to be great for college football. It's going to be great for both fan bases. Ultimately, it's not going to be great for the team that doesn't win that football game. But it's not the end of the world. And so that's what, like, these rankings and like the fanfare associated with these rankings about why did we drop and why do they move up, and it's like it really doesn't matter. And I think in some cases it's like now for Ohio State, it's like one next test against again, it should be a good team, Marshall, and then you get into those two, as you call them, stepping stones ahead of Oregon. And that's the one thing that I'll say when you watch, and I don't watch a lot, but I follow a lot of college football. It's like, to me, like, Texas looks great. Tennessee looks awesome. Ole Miss wasn't up to standard against, a low standard opponent. Oklahoma's been pressed. Bama's been tested. It's like, Oregon's been tested, 2 weeks in a row, first half against Oregon State, and then finally they put pedal to the metal. So like there's holes. And of course, we already talked about Georgia, Kentucky. There's holes in all these teams that everybody wants us to rank super high, and kind of pigeonhole them in the college football playoff in a specific seed. So now it's just about going out and doing it, and who can become the most consistent and really get it rolling.
Yeah. I was gonna bring it up with you. No, but I want to bring up the Oregon thing. But first, I want to ask you, what do you 56 50? What was it? What was the opening score? 56-0 last the previous week, and then 52-6 the next in the opener.
The Akron
opening
game,
win over Akron. What could you see these coaches really emphasizing this past week? And then this coming week, again, going in preparation for the Marshall game, what, from your vantage point, what needs to get better about this Ohio State football team?
What needs to get better? I mean, it's probably going to be it's going to be cutting hairs to say things can get better. But again, I think the Akron game, I would say the slow start, which then got addressed in the Western Michigan game, so that happened in a week. The management of a bye, because then let's just say in theory, you win the next two, you go into Oregon, you go out to Oregon, you win Oregon, and then you're going to have another bye. How do you manage that bye? But the one thing that's done through this week that I will say, because and it's unique given the outcomes of both football games, is like a lot of self-scouting happens in this situation. Having a bye this early after your first two games. So they have to evaluate who has done what and what have they done well and where. And I'm talking about the shuffling of the offensive line, the receivers in specific spots, in specific plays, the quarterbacks, and the running backs, the DBs in specific coverages. And they're going to, Knowles has a scheme, Chip Kelly has a scheme, and it's predominantly X, whether it's, zone or man on defense, or it's predominantly, zone or gap scheme in the run game, and, drop back pass or boots and waggles. Who does what, where? And so you're evaluating how can we accentuate these players and grow them in these things that they do well. And if they've shown any deficiencies or things they need to work on, this was that week to undo those and get those things better. And then I think as a play caller, both with Jim Knowles and Chip Kelly, and I'll say Ryan Day, he's probably still got a hand in what's being called, is you've put these plays offensively and defensively on a tape, you start to layer things. It's like, okay, we lined up, we shifted to this, we lined up in that, and we ran this. Okay. That's the A. Like, okay, so then against Marshall, let's build and try to get to the B, which then allows you to get to the C. Let's shift in motion to this and then run that off of it because we've already run it, and it's like you start to layer, like you layer the
Yeah.
lasagna, layer the cake, and dig in. And that's what a bye week allows you to do because otherwise you do have analysts within the program that are, providing data to the coaches. But when you're playing a game the next week, it's very hard to add more to what you're already doing or change what you've already been done with a technique, a line alignment, or a shift or a motion. Conceptually, it's got to build off what you've worked on through training camp and you've already done. Or in some cases, if Chip Kelly or Jim Knowles brought a new blitz or an exotic blitz or an exotic play off a shift in motion and some reverse or something against either the teams we played against or even against Marshall, it's like, and it didn't work. That gets backburnered for a while, right? Because it just didn't, you saw it in real time and it just didn't work out and you kind of backburner it, but you don't know it until you get the 11 guys on the field doing it in real time.
Yeah, I'm with you. As I look at this team, I mean, we talked about it, like I said, at Lettermen Row. I mean, depth at safety is an interesting question. Looks like they figured out their linebacker situation. You and I talked about that last week. Sonny Styles looks like the real deal. Cody Simon, but then Arvell Reese is showing you that right up and coming dude.
Yeah.
But Ryan Day said you almost got to figure out a way to get him on the game because he goes 100%. 100 miles
Even
an
at D
hour.
end or anywhere. Yeah, you're right.
And then what do you do with CJ Hicks? I mean, I think CJ Hicks, people are, he's been a good punching bag for some folks I think he's played fairly well when he's been in there, but you've got these pieces that you can enhance other parts of your game with from a defensive standpoint. And then offensively, they've really just sort of scratched the surface of what the passing game can be, in my opinion.
I agree.
And maybe that's a good thing. Sometimes you just got to go out and run. They're going to be obviously big time favorites this week, prohibitive favorites again this week. But do you ever go into a game? Do you remember going into a game where, despite what the other opponent was, you were going to work on certain things in a game? Do you ever remember that happening, Matt?
Yes, absolutely. So again, especially coming out of a bye week, there are going to be, and I kind of talked about those points of emphasis, whether it's schematic or specific players that they do these things well. So you want them to keep doing those things well, and you want to accentuate those and even maybe build on those. And then the things that you don't do well as an offense, especially this early, if they've and I'll just say take Chip Kelly for example. Chip Kelly, back at Oregon, Chip Kelly in the NFL, Chip Kelly out at UCLA, doesn't just construct things or run things just for the sake of running them. At one point in his football career, this scheme schematically, a specific formation, a shift or a play, it worked.
Yeah.
And he loves it. It's his baby somewhere. And he's probably got 50 of them. He's just now got to implement it appropriately at the right time at Ohio State with the right players in the right situation. And that's where as I kind of alluded to, it's like these early games allow you to tinker with the offense. So it's not a finished product by any means, although the result with 50 plus points in 2 games, and I know there's been defensive scores as well, is very attractive. And you're going to, oh shit, we can beat everybody by 50 points. That's just not always the case. But you want to be able to have, this well-rounded repertoire of football plays and not just Jeremiah Smith. I'm not trying to say this is all he's done. Jeremiah Smith on a go route, or Jeremiah Smith's going to catch a slant in the slant window and make a guy miss and go for 80. You'll do that against Western Michigan and Akron and Marshall. You're not going to be able to do that against Penn State, against Michigan, against Oregon, right? They're going to have other great 4-star, 5-star athletes. So then, okay, do you run the sluggo? Do you run the slant and go? Because the corner's been playing with bad eyes, and it's like, this is what we used to do. And so by having, Ryan Day and his experience, as the head football coach and understanding what Ohio State football and the players represent and the pressure to win these football games, and Chip Kelly come from past situations and Jim Knowles come from other big situations, and the growth that he's had defensively, it's like, it's how do we get our playmakers the ball more? And once the defense or offense matches us and stops that, how do we continue throwing that football to our playmakers who are immensely talented and can turn a 3-yard gain into a 70-yard gain, just by getting the football in the appropriate time.
Yeah. Hey, last thing. Is it good where the minutes roll by when you get rocking and rolling here? is it good that Ohio State not only had the week off, but got to watch, if they were smart, they watched the Oregon State game, and they saw an Oregon team really come into its own in the second half. With Dylan Gabriel at the controls. Obviously, he's been playing very well, but offensively, they've been a little start, stop, start, stop, start, stop in the second half against Oregon State, their bitter rival. They call it a civil war for all kinds of reasons, one of which is it almost is like that. They're only, 45, 50 miles apart out there. Is it good that they got to see that Oregon, oh my goodness, second half, Oregon, man, they're for real. You understand what I'm saying?
Of course. It is.
You're human beings. Of course, you look forward a little bit. Go ahead.
Absolutely. I'll even give two game perspectives. I think it was great this weekend to be able to sit back and watch Oregon, that big challenge that everybody's pointing to here in a couple of weeks, and watch them sputter in the first half, then make some halftime adjustments and come out and roll, right? And put 30, 35 points, on their rival in the second half, and actually see in real time what differences were made. Was it tempo? Was it go balls? Was it screens? Was it, the power read with Dylan Gabriel? I think he took off for a long run.
Yeah.
So that game, yes, future opponent, was very good to see. But then I think, and you referenced it earlier, but I also think like having Georgia, Kentucky on in primetime and having the number one team in the country go on the road, not play their best, struggle offensively, turn it into a slugfest defensively between both DCs and both players. Like who's gonna bat their eyes first, right?
Yeah.
And in a stare down, and see a highly talented, highly touted number one team in the country, multiple national championship winner in the last 5 years, struggle against again, I'll call them a quality opponent. And Kentucky's on the rise and has been on the rise. I think he won 9 games last year, so they're a very good SEC opponent. But on the road at night in that environment, I think it's good for them for Ryan Day to reference it in meetings, for the coaches to reference it in meetings, and guys to see that, the Goliath of college football can get tested each and every week if you're not ready to play.
Yeah. You never know what kind of rock they got in the sling, right?
That's right.
when you walk in there. Oh my goodness. Hey, Matt, once again, I enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope the folks at home listening in their cars, maybe listening on the beach, maybe in parts of Eastern Asia and Western Europe and Middle Europe. I hope they all enjoyed listening to us once again. We do get a lot of listeners out there from all over the place, and I want to ask you one last question before we go.
Sure.
If as a player, is it in your head that really, I mean, you want to kick somebody's butt, but just hearkening back to you guys in 2002, the ridiculous close calls y'all had.
Yeah.
And like Kirby Smart made the point the other night, they didn't play anywhere close to their best game. Kentucky had a lot to do with that.
Yes.
The Kentucky-Georgia game, you guys had great escapes, 9 or 10 times
Yeah.
in your national championship season, and you put off one of the great victories in college football history. But do you have it in your mind, hey, do you reach a point in your mind where we're going to win this game? We've been here before. We just have to summon it. I'm talking about in the fourth quarter of a tight football game, or going into overtime at Illinois when y'all had your first overtime game in Ohio State history there. Does a team get a little bit of a mojo about it that y'all are going to find a way? Did you feel that in 2002?
Absolutely. And I think like Mike Doss would probably say the same thing, that like we, as because the defense was so good that year, the offense, with Claret, and his health, especially towards the end of the year, was a little wishy-washy. We couldn't just throw the ball with Krenzel at will, even though we would have liked to. It was trestle ball, but we, as a defense, we wanted to be the one to have to get the stop. We wanted to be the one to have to get the stop to give the ball back to the offense. So that pressure, that comes with those close games, we never batted an eye. And I also say, like, that's what a lot of people who've never played, college or professional sports is like, man, what is it like? And it's like, they want to get inside your brain.
Yeah.
And like, when you are a trained individual, it's the same way. And I'm not trying to make a comparison, but like, the military, the Navy SEALs, the active duty guys that are, frontliners that are, actively doing the war stuff with guns, they just do what they're trained to do. they don't feel the pressure. You just react.
Yeah.
And I think the back half of that year, we just kept winning, which only kind of, did never get, and I'll say this, by winning those close games, we never became the overconfident team that's just going to roll our helmets out there and they're just going to lay down for us.
Yeah.
So we knew, and also this is what you'll like, and we're seeing this every weekend, at my son's high school. Like when you're very good at what you do, you're always going to have a target on your back. No matter the opponent, they're gonna bring their best. The coaches are gonna coach harder. The players are gonna play harder. They're gonna have a couple trips up their sleeve. You're gonna have to weather some storms and not hit the panic button, but just be true to who the culture and makeup of your team, and just go. This is who we are. We get a stop. We give it back to Krenzel. He runs down the field. With Maurice, they're gonna hand. Tress is gonna do right offensively to go get us the points, and then if they go 2-minute drill, we'll get the stop. We'll get the pick late. To end this thing.
Yeah. Well, that's the challenge. Of course, the problem, the good thing now, the luxury, if it's a luxury, is you don't have to win every game, to get to play for the championship.
Right.
But, you can't have too many slip ups, and, bigger challenges await Ohio State, clearly as this season moves along. And like we started out, the polls, they're not meaningless right now, but they don't mean nearly as much as when that first college football playoff rankings come out, 2/3 of the way through the season, and you really see where you stack up. And then again, the four majors are probably going to get their champions with a first round bye in the playoffs.
Well, I think what's very interesting this year, or not this year, but since the implementation of the college football playoff, and it'll be very interesting this year now that they've gone to 12, is how a win is a win is a win, right? Say Georgia won the game, but Georgia in both polls bumped down to number 2 because of the fashion with which Texas won their game.
Right.
So it'll be and that's the other onus that a lot of coaches have to take as the season goes on. When you get into the college football playoff, rankings coming out, is the fashion with which you win and the fashion with which someone who might be right behind you or right in front of you also wins can affect their judgment as the committee makes their choices. Like, okay, if we all 3 win, and they won by 40 and we won by a touchdown, we can fall and they can jump, So it'll be very interesting to see, how that goes on, especially again, now that it's 12, not just 4, where, a very, very good football team at 5 and 6 are outside looking in based on the fashion with which they won a football game.
Yeah. And the bottom line is that the four majors conferences, you win your conference championship game, you're getting an off week. I mean, you're getting a bye the first round of the playoff.
That's big at that juncture.
Yeah, which is huge, because let's face it, man, Georgia plays at Alabama next week. Georgia plays at Texas, in October. I mean, a lot of things are going to be figured out from the standpoint of who's best, through the regular season. Ohio State plays at Oregon. Takes on Nebraska after that, before it goes to Penn State.
Yep.
So a lot of things are going to get figured out on the field, which is kind of fun about this. But the great thing about it, like you just pointed out, is it's not the end of your season necessarily of your main goal if you do have a slip up. And that's what stands out about this now, the expanded playoff. But getting that first round bye, and we'll talk about this more as the season goes on. That is going to be so huge to have.
Well, yes.
Not to have a game of jeopardy for one round in the playoff.
Sure. And again, I'll just take for the Big Ten Conference, and let's just say that Ohio State's going to play Michigan, and then Ohio State's going to play the second best team in our very tough conference that very next week when we beat Michigan. And so it's like 2 pressure-packed, a lot on the line football games, and then you'd love to just go, phew, and let out that exhale and have that week off. And here's the other thing that I'll say: you if you're dinged up after a long season, in that week, guys can get healthy. And then I think there's something to be said about having a lot of what we talked about this week, and what we'll be able to talk about after Oregon as well, is like that ability to sit back and watch.
Yeah.
And watch the game. Our guys would be watching the opponents or the potential opponents, those 2 games, and you're going to be able to study it all week, along with getting back into your, game mode and preparation for them. So it's very important. And I think it's the equivalent to, and I don't have the data to support it, but the NFL, what that first round bye means, by having the number 1 record now that there's, 7 teams get in. and now there's one bye, it means a lot. And those teams only have to go win 2 games and you're in the chip. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah, exactly. In the ship. Oh, man. All right, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, college football fans across the nation, around the world, come to an end of another Tim May show featuring, I'm going to say featuring Matt Wilhelm.
Yes.
Matt, go plug a hole somewhere, man. Let's run the Red Dog Blitz or something like that. But
I hear you.
yeah, there's a lot of football to be played, man. We just, like we said, we scratched the surface on what this season could be. And like you said, the refresher over the weekend was, hey, it can take a weird turn if you don't look out
Yeah.
from the standpoint of either looking ahead or losing a player. It can change the complexion of your football team in a heartbeat. So on behalf of Matt Wilhelm, ladies and gentlemen, this is Tim May. This is the Tim May Show. We'll be back again next week. We'll see you then.